slightly over time. So I changed the title, and this, I'm going to try to do too much, as usual, but I'm presenting a composite of work that Fatima Raja and I have been working on. This is Fatima Raja, a amazing graduate student from the Department of Education at UCSC. And I also am very lucky to have program assistants. Oh my gosh, where's our team? Great timing. Emily's here, who work with me in Corre la Voz. And hopefully I'll get to the part in the presentation that is about Corre la Voz and some of the practices, like Stephanie, we sometimes struggle to explain and represent what it is that we do in terms of the language and culture curriculum that makes our work so powerful. So I decided to shift into a metaphor of ecologies. How can we think of our work in language and culture as ecologies? Because I think that might make it more accessible to more people. And the new title is Education for Community Development, which is actually a paradigm that comes from my understanding and learning that I was able to gather in Mexico and Latin America. And that is something that I think that we do not use much in this country. Restoring ecologies of cross-generational belonging and cultural justice practices, which is a lot of the work that we do in the program and aligns quite a bit with the work that Amy shared for wellness. What are the practices that we use to restore people from the trauma that they've gone through? And how is this related to language and communication? And how can we fund it? So given that we're all so overstretched and underfunded, and that specifically these projects do so much with so little already, how can we improve the representation of what we do, including specifically achievements in language literacy and culture pedagogies? And maybe we can just consolidate that by talking about, communication. How can we make communication the topic? How can we connect these as essential to larger aims for academic, individual, and social success so that schools start funding it and making it essential again, if we thought that it once was? How can we get institutional investment in community engagement at scale instead of micro-projects? And how can we make this visible as an academic labor issue at all levels, at the university, in communities, and in all the programs that do this kind of work? And we all have our stories, all of the ways in which the work that we do is unrecognized and is basically unsustainable at the current level. So I've been brainstorming and sort of gathering in my basket some funds or approaches that do systemic and sort of shifting curricular work. And one of them was brought to the table yesterday by Deb McCoy, that I was thinking, how can we align our projects with these investments in systems and curricular changes? So there's the International Bateson Institute. I'm not going to talk about that much, but I'm happy to discuss it later. HSI programming, State of California Ethnic Studies curriculum, which is about to be developed and implemented, and then the Seal of Civic Engagement, which Deb shared with us. In our county, there's a new 5-year strategic plan that seeks to address equity, seeks to integrate services, tries to reach out to community partners. So how can we take advantage of this and say, well, if you want all these things, this is a great way to do it? I'd like people to see our micro projects, and in some cases, in some sites, more than micro, our networks, as samples of what could be done and brought to scale with adequate investment. And I want to say also that not all programs should be scaled up as themselves. and want to instead emphasize that all of them would flourish better in an ecology with mutually supportive programs. And I think the San Diego presentation really showed that. You know, when there are other programs and other partners present, they all benefit from that environment where they're all in the same space and there's an agreement that this works. So I'm using the metaphor of ecologies, but also permaculture. You know, when people invest in a long-term plan and say, you know, we're not going to just have like a little garden each year. We're going to invest in something that has fruit trees. We're going to invest in maybe a microclimate that, you know, each part of this climate is intentionally put there because we know that it benefits all of the other parts of the climate. They're all needed. We're going to create biodiversity that is maybe, you know, drawing on native sustainable species in this area. This is a smart way to go. It takes advantage of the resources that we have. It reflects an understanding of the climate that we live in. And it is supposed to yield for the people that live there. And I'm using this, I feel a little bit desperate sometimes when I talk to people about language and culture and they don't seem to know what that is. And also, when we teach about, I didn't start myself. When, we talk about race, culture, social justice, and there's a number of people in the class and they're very uncomfortable. But when we talk about mapping or when we talk about ecology, thank you, it is somehow more approachable. It's just, the tension level drops. I'm not going to go into this metaphor. I think it's sort of like visually accessible. When we drain communities of people, when we drain communities of language, of energy, when we pull it into an extractive system, it turns into a desert. How can we invest in our communities using university resources and collaborative resources? Okay, so the project that Fatima did looked at, and this is sort of the steps of her process, looking at HSI, this is just a sample, looking at HSI criteria, looking at the scholarship, if, not just HSI, Department of Education, if our institutions really were serving Latinx populations and first-generation students, this is what they would really look like. And then looking at our program, how do we already align with these goals and these criteria? And also looking at what are the gaps, what would we need in terms of resources to make our goals more feasible and to bring us more in alignment, which is sort of the model that HSI grant getting moves into. This is a sort of just a grab from Fatima's work about drawing on Garcia's thinking about what HSI or what Hispanic serving institutions should be. And in general, this is, Fatima found, she interviewed a bunch of alumni from CLV and found that, we have this tiny little micro program, which is not an institution, but that aligns with these goals. What would it look like if the entire university, if the entire university and the community were collaborating to support programs like this? And then there's all these other gaps. It turns out that by talking also to alumni and others, there are all these gaps that make it difficult to sustain. And all of us, I've had conversations with every single one of you, I think, about the difficulties in sustaining our programming. I made a chart to discuss some of the ecological work that we've been doing at Oaks, and don't have time to explain it, but we have been trying to create more of like an on-campus ecology for this. And just really briefly, one thing that is interesting is to think about how we might get grants. Especially HSI seems to be a lot more conducive to bringing money into the university. It would be great to see if we could get money to, bring it into the community. But we see that a lot of the same gains, and I think, Amy really mentioned this, it's like a parallel process. The same kinds of healing through language and culture recovery are happening through, with mentors, creating this sense of belonging that are happening in the community. Who are the people that might be bringing funding or support work in the community that care about the students enough to notice that, if you're doing this work, we want to support you. And I also wanted to say that, while mentors are, really quickly saying oh, wow, this is great. I'm able to connect this with my LALS, ethnic studies, sociology. It's all making sense now. I'm ready to go into my next step. With 4th and 5th graders, we're doing that work every day to build communication skills for resistance, communication skills for healing, and practices that involve turn taking, justice work that is, maybe it's in English, maybe it's in Spanish, but it's giving students voice. And this really connects also, I really resonated so much with Amy's presentation about, it's not just, ensuring that kids know that they should be able to have voice. It's the practices, it's teaching the communication skills and creating a classroom environment where they are practicing having voice, and that the team is creating routines in their language so that they can tell themselves, it's my turn now, or one mic, one mic, one mic. And those routines also are very conducive to translanguaging. When people are learning language, we're repeating them over and over again, and so they're great for learning language. Okay, I'm out of time, but that's where I had it. And unfortunately, we had so many people in the panel, we don't have time for the Q&A and discussion that we had hoped to have, but we hope that we can bring it into the roundtables and catch up with you later. Thank you.